Hello everyone. This lecture covers imaging, photography, film, video, and digital arts, and it corresponds with Chapter 10 of Understanding Art, 11th edition. The learning objectives for this lecture include being able to use a basic vocabulary for the photographic process, including its historical development, describe the differences among genres of photography, such as portraiture, photojournalism, and photography as fine art, summarize the history of film technology, discuss a variety of techniques and experiences with cinematography, summarize the genesis of video as an art form and the work of current practitioners of the medium, and explain the role of digital art and web design in contemporary culture. So we're starting with photography. The word photography is derived from the Greek roots meaning to write with light. The scientific aspects of photography concern the ways in which images of objects are made on a photosensitive surface, such as film, by light that passes through a lens. Chemical changes occur in the film so that the images are recorded, and photographers make artistic choices related to materials, lighting conditions, printing processes, and subject matter. So when we talk about photography, we want to think about the fact that artists are very much composing their compositions in a similar way that other 2D media artists are in terms of composition, trying to incorporate the elements of art and principles of design. And the textbook talks about this photograph by Ansel Adams. It says Adams's composition is as much about the design elements like shape, texture, and value as it is a visual document of the California landscape. So even just looking at this, the exercise that we've done about thinking about the elements of art and principles of design, you could easily go through and do that. And that's something that photographers are actively doing when they are looking through their lens and making choices about how they're going to photograph something. The history of photography is full of evidence of the artist photographer boldly going where no one has been before, or challenging the viewer to see anew the familiar and ubiquitous. The mood, stylistic inclinations, cultural biases, and technical preferences influence the nature of the creative product. As observers, we are as enriched by the diversity of this medium as much as any other in the visual arts. So one of the things that's important to know about photography is how a camera works, and it's very similar to how our eyeballs work. The amount of light that enters a camera is determined by the size of the opening or aperture in the shutter, and the size of the aperture is called the f-stop. And the shutter can also remain open to light for various amounts of time. The camera lens focuses light onto a photosensitive surface, such as film, and lenses may be telephoto for magnifying faraway objects or wide angle for broad views of confined areas. So the way that a camera works is much like how you open your eyes and allow light to pass through your pupil and reflect back on your retina. It's the same kind of situation with the aperture and the f-stop working together to allow light into the camera and reflect that back onto the film. So when an image is shot, it is captured as film or recorded on an electric memory device. Prints are made directly from color reversal film, in which each of the photosensitive layers corresponds to one of the primary colors in additive color mixtures, blue, green, or red. Remember that we're speaking about light here, so the primary colors are not red, yellow, blue, as they would be with mixing pigments. We're talking about mixing light in this case. So the primary colors are blue, green, and red when it comes to light. When color reversal film is exposed to light and treated chemically, mixtures of the primary colors emerge. Negatives are made from color negative film, in which each photosensitive layer corresponds to the complement of the primary color it represents. And digital photography is a little bit different in terms of how it records images. Digital cameras translate the visual images that pass through the lens into bits of digital information, which are recorded onto an electronic storage device rather than film. High-quality digital cameras take photos whose resolution, that is like the sharpness, rivals that of film images. The stored information can be either shown on a display screen or printed or both. So let's talk a little bit about the history of photography. And it starts with the camera obscura. And so the camera obscura is literally the covered over or darkened room, was used by Renaissance artists. So that goes all the way back to the 1400s to 1600s to help them accurately portray depth or perspective on a two-dimensional surface. The camera obscura could be a box, as shown in this picture, or an actual room with a small hole that admits light through one wall. The beam of light projects the outside scene upside down on a surface within the box. Exactly the same way that it works in our eyes, and it's our brain that turns the image right side up for us, so that we see everything right side up. The artist simply traces the scene as shown to achieve a proper perspective, to truly imitate nature. So 1727, the German physicist Heinrich Schulze discovered that silver salts had light-sensitive qualities, but he never tried to record natural images. And it was in 1802 that Thomas Wedgwood, who's the son of a very well-known English potter, Wedgwood pottery, reported his discovery that paper soaked in silver nitrate did take on projected images as a chemical reaction to light. However, the images were not permanent. So the image that you're seeing right there is one that was permanent at some point. That one we still have. Then in 1826, the Frenchman Joseph Nicephore Niepce invented heliography, and that's what you're looking at, the first heliograph that he'd made. Bitumen, or asphalt residue, was placed on a pewter plate to create a photosensitive surface. The bitumen was soluble in lavender oil if kept in the dark, but insoluble if struck by light. So Niepce used a kind of camera obscura to expose the plate for several hours, and then he washed the plate in lavender oil. The pewter showed through where there had been little or no light, creating the image of the darker areas of the scene. So the bitumen remained where the light had struck, however, leaving lighter values. So that image that you're seeing was out his window, and that's like the first heliograph ever recorded. The daguerreotype, resulted from a partnership formed in 1829 between Niepce and another Frenchman, Louis-Jacques Mundet Daguerre. The daguerreotype uses a thin sheet of silver-plated copper, and the plate was chemically treated, placed in a camera obscura, and exposed to a narrow beam of light. So after the exposure, the plate was treated chemically once more. So some of the drawbacks, or I guess just the facts about daguerreotypes, was that the exposure was quite long, meaning they had to expose the light onto the plate for a really long time. The image was reversed left to right, so it was kind of like a backwards image. And the daguerreotypes were pretty delicate. You had to, I think, encase them with glass to make sure that they didn't get messed up. And there was no negative, so you couldn't reproduce the image multiple times. So the negative was actually invented in 1839 by a British scientist, William Henry Fox Talbot, and Talbot found that sensitized paper coated with emulsions could be substituted for the copper plate of the daguerreotype. He would place an object, such as a sprig of a plant, on the paper and expose the arrangement to light. The paper was darkened by the exposure in all the areas except those covered by the object. So translucent areas, allowing some passage of light, resulted in a range of grays. And photography continued to improve rapidly for the next 50 or 60 years. Faster emulsions, glass plate negatives, better camera lenses, and photographs became increasingly more available to the general public. The next major step in the history of photography came with the introduction by Louis Lumière of the autochrome color process in 1907. Autochromes were glass plates coated with 3 layers of dyed potato starch that served as color filters. So a layer of silver bromide emulsion was covered with the starch, and when the autochrome was developed, it yielded a positive color transparency. So you could get a kind of color, as demonstrated in this photo. By the 1850s, photographic technology and the demands of a growing middle class in the wake of the American and French revolutions came together to create a burgeoning business in portrait photography. Having a likeness of oneself was formerly reserved for the wealthy who could afford to commission painters. Photography became the democratic equalizer. The rich, the famous, and the average bourgeois citizen could now be memorialized and trumpet their existence long after their flesh had rejoined the elements from which it was composed. So portrait photography was one of the first really booms of photography, and it was something that was very much composed. So people had active choices, just as we do today, about how they wanted to present themselves, how they wanted to be positioned. And it was something that with the advent of photography, we start to see growing abstraction in other forms of art. So now that we can make the likeness of people or anything really, and it can be extremely realistic, artists started exploring more of the other styles such as abstraction and non-objective art. So prior to the 19th century, there were a few illustrations in newspapers and magazines. Those that did appear were usually in the form of engravings or drawings. And photography really revolutionized the capacity of the news media to bring realistic representations of important events before the eyes of the public. So here we have a photograph by Alexander Gardner, and he was famous for doing some photography of the Civil War. And at the time that the Civil War is happening, it was still, exposure time was still too long, so there weren't photographers out taking pictures of battles. They couldn't really be in the heat of the moment, but there were lots of photographs of soldiers, maybe in their camps, and then of battlefields afterwards. And this was something that was difficult to put in the newspaper because it was difficult to reproduce it, and it was pretty expensive. So this wasn't an instant thing where they started showing up quickly in newspapers. However, it did provide people with the opportunity to see things about the war that they might not have ever seen. During the Great Depression of the 1930s, the conscience of the nation was stirred by the work of many photographers hired by the Farm Security Administration, and Dorothea Lange and Walker Evans, among others, portrayed the lifestyles of migrant farm workers and sharecroppers. Perhaps you've seen this photo before. It is one of the most famous from this time period. This very up-close portrait of a mother with her two children, actually three children, and the job of the photographers at this time was to spend time with the migrant workers, kind of develop a report with them so that they could take their photographs, and this allowed people all across the nation to start seeing what was going on with things like war, with the Great Depression. It really provided literally an eye-opening experience for people who weren't necessarily clued in to what was happening. And as World War II was drawing to an end in Europe, Margaret Bourke-White was a photographer for Life magazine, and she arrived at the Nazi concentration camp in Buchenwald in time for its liberation by Patton. And her photograph, The Living Dead of Buchenwald, was published in Life in 1945, and it became one of the most famous images from World War II, with the depiction of the Holocaust, the Nazi effort to annihilate the Jewish people. So for a long time, photography was used strictly to document things. And even in those cases, like the example of the photograph of the Civil War and the Holocaust, there was still some, artistic decisions made by the photographer in terms of positioning maybe the people, like the migrant mother. There are some artistic choices, and the photographer is still making some choices about how to frame a photograph and things like that. And photography also started to develop develop in itself as an art form. So this is one of the examples of artists starting to get a little bit creative with their exposure time. And this one of the Flatiron Building in New York City is specifically known for kind of its example of kind of the range of values. You think about the line work in this composition. We have the trees kind of going more horizontal and vertical, kind of echoing by the Flatiron Building. So photography as an art form starts to really develop at the beginning of the 1900s. And jumping ahead, Sandy Skoglund is an artist who builds on that idea of photography as an art form. She sets up kind of scenes to photographs. So she does sculptures. This one's called Radioactive Cats, where she's made a lot of paper mache cats, painted them this bright kind of glowing green color. The people in the photograph are live people that have been posed in a particular way. So she kind of sets up these scenes to photograph. So photography is very much, not only to document the world around us, but a tool for creative expression as well. And Cindy Sherman is another artist who uses herself as the art form, and the photography is simply the documentation of what she's doing. She often dresses up and does different hairstyles and costumes and does self-portraits of herself. And so she does sometimes film stills and sometimes photography. But once again, it's the idea of composing how you want to be presented. So going back to that history of portraiture, and she's very much making active choices about kind of the character that she wants to portray. Shirin Neshat is an Iranian-American artist, and she is an artist that incorporates other mediums with her photography. She does film as well, but in this one, she incorporates text with her photography. So she does a combination. A lot of her work is about Iranian women and people kind of just in their experience of living in Iran after the revolution of the 1970s. And as photography continued to develop, artists were able to develop other ways to capture that idea of motion and time. That's one of the things that we've mentioned before with, the elements of art is the idea of motion and time. And so photography includes that as well, being able to capture this very, just a sense of movement, but also the advance in technology of photography has allowed us to do these rapid progression photos that allows us to catch these brief moments that might not be captured. Okay, so the development of photography naturally leads us to the development of film, and this idea of capturing motion is something that, of course, artists are progressing towards as as photography developed. So in 1878, Edward Muybridge was actually commissioned to do some photographs of a horse running. So he did this at a racetrack, and I think it was 24 cameras were set up to take pictures of a horse as it ran by, because there was kind of a bet between people about whether or not a horse has all four legs off the ground at some point while it's galloping. There had never been a way to really capture that or have proof of it. So you can see, and through the photographs, that at one point, as a horse is galloping, all four legs are off the ground. So film and video are time-based mediums, and so this idea of the passage of time is one of the things that we talk about. So in the 19th century, Edward Muybridge, that guy that took the photos of the horse, developed a device that could photograph a rapid sequence of images, and it was called the zoopraxiscope, which projected the images onto a screen. So you can see the disc, and it has, you can see I think it's supposed to be a donkey kicking its legs up, but that was a way the rapid progression of the images could be projected onto a screen, and you could actually kind of see it move around one picture at a time and look like the donkey was kicking its legs. The birth of motion pictures or cinema was the result of specific inventions, including film. So in this usage, images printed on celluloid and cut into strips. And Thomas Edison was patented with the kinetoscope, a motion picture viewing device, in 1891. So this is a picture of the kinetoscope, and it was kind of like a box that when you looked down into it, the film, you can kind of see it's like wrapped up and down and up and down and up and down inside the box, and it would pass by the viewing screen and appear to, the objects would appear to be moving. In 1895, brothers Auguste and Louis Lumière, we've heard of him before, patented the cinematograph, a camera and projector in one piece of equipment. And within a few short years of these inventions, the commercial movie houses sprang up in France and the United States. And one of the first films was called The Demolition of a Wall, which is literally just a film of some people demolishing a wall. But the idea that you could watch a series of images passing by and see that progression of time was really groundbreaking. So now we're going to talk about some cinematography techniques. So that word cinematography is the art of making motion pictures. And I've included a film strip image on there for you so that you understand that when you are seeing a strip of film being played, you are actually seeing 16 to 24 pictures or frames per second. It's usually about closer to 24. So for every 1 second of film, you are seeing 24 little pictures, and each one is ever so slightly different from the one preceding it. Okay, so some techniques that we're going to look at, manipulating time, one of this dimension that we've been speaking about. And I'm going to jump in and out and actually show you some of these film clips because, of course, I think that it registers a little bit more if you actually see them. So one of the effects for manipulating time is with a slow motion effect, and the opening sequence of Chariots of Fire is a good example of that. So I'm going to just play a couple seconds of that for you.
Remember those few young men with hope in our hearts and wings on our heels.
Okay. And another example of this slow motion effect is the opening sequence from Quentin Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs. I'm not going to show you clips of every single movie, but I'm going to show you some of these. So the idea with slow motion is not doing less frames per second. It's actually, as they're filming it, they're filming more frames per second. And then when it's played back at that rate of 24 frames per second. And that's what makes it seem like it's going slower. And another technique with slow motion effects was The Matrix, in which they have an effect known as bullet time, in which multiple cameras arranged at multiple angles and vantage points, like above, below, alongside, in front of, and behind the action, capture the scene in many thousands of still images. The frames are then assembled with the aid of a computer to create the illusion of frozen time or slowly moving time, like when Neo is dodging bullets, which I will now show you. Okay, and let's talk a little bit about some editing techniques. So, editing has to do with one scene or one shot ends and another one happens. And a lot of times in editing, cutting on action is just kind of like a seamless edit where one thing stops and another one starts. Jump cut is when there's like an abrupt change, and this film called Breathless has a good one in this little scene. So what you'll see is as the woman is speaking, suddenly she's going to be holding a mirror, and it's like kind of this jarring effect, and it's done on purpose to kind of create like a jump in time.
Je voudrais rester à côté de toi.
Non, ce n'est pas ça, Michel.
So I know that that seems very short and it's maybe not even noticeable, but the idea is kind of like it's called a jump cut, that where it just jumps to the next scene. Another editing technique is called match cut, and this is when parallel action editing employs the technique of cross-cutting, the act of cutting back and forth between two different scenes, thereby interweaving them and creating a meaningful connection between them. And the example that the textbook shows is from the movie Psycho. I'm not going to show this part, but the idea that it kind of jumps from the scene of the woman getting murdered to when she's laying on the floor. And also a montage. Through montage, multiple spaces and time periods can be spliced together to create a new narrative connection between them. So a montage sequence has a special opportunity to collapse time by jumping from moment to moment, allowing days, weeks, or years to take place within only a few seconds or minutes of screen time. The textbook gives the example of the battleship Potemkin. There is a scene about Odessa steps. I'm not going to play this particular scene, but I'm sure maybe you've all seen a montage in some kind of movie, often like maybe training montages, like for certain movies, right? Like where the main character goes from like not being able to do very much, and then kind of does this montage of scenes, these clips, so, and then after a few weeks, like they can, now do a pull-up or whatever it is, right? Okay, let's talk a little bit about animation. Animation creates the illusion of movement through the manipulation and duplication of, for example, drawings or computer-generated images or clay figures. With traditional animation, each drawing differs slightly from the one preceding it, just as with early photographs and early cinematography. It's the same concept that you're still looking at 24 frames per second. It's like kind of 24 drawings, right? Maybe you've all made like one of those little flip books before where you draw little pictures and every single one has to be changed slightly. But that's the idea of animation, is that you're looking at little drawn pictures. And of course, today, now we have the aid of computers to do that. Couple of things about animation. We also have stop motion animation, where instead of doing drawings, now there can be objects that are posed. So some good examples of that: Tim Burton's Corpse Bride, and Wes Anderson's Fantastic Mr. Fox, where they actually have little sculptures that are positioned, take a picture of it, positioned, take a picture of it. It's extremely labor intensive because, once again, you have to have about 24 images per second of film. And I think actually with stop motion, I think you actually do double that. So it's a large process, right? And every single motion can only be moved just a little bit. So just even imagining, someone blinking and showing that takes a lot of time. Okay, so broadly speaking, motion pictures are visual experiences that entertain us or move us. And like other artists, cinematographers also create things like satire, social commentary, fantasy, symbolism. So film, just like the other types of art that we've talked about this semester, has expressive content behind it. One example of propaganda is an early film from the 1930s called The Triumph of Will. Is actually a German-made film, and it is kind of pro-Nazi. It's a pro-Nazi film. It was banned in the United States, but it was all set up to kind of proclaim the values of that group of people to program, as a form of propaganda. And satire is when humor or irony or exaggeration is used to ridicule or expose and criticize people's stupidity or vices. A lot of times it has to do with politics or topical issues of the time. Charlie Chaplin's famous movie called The Great Dictator is an example of satire where he points out the situation that's happening with World War II and Hitler. Social commentary would be films that are making comments about social issues of the day. This is a film that is based on the novel, The Grapes of Wrath, which is all about migrant workers happening during the Dust Bowl and Great Depression. And then certainly cinematographers embrace fantasy and symbolism. And this is a good example to think about, the beyond just the storytelling component, but the sets, the costumes, and all the lighting, all of that kind of couples into the expressive components of the films. Salvador Dali is known mostly as a visual artist in printmaking and painting. But he did some films as well, and sometimes the artists will speak about the symbolism behind certain components of their films, and other times they will, like with Salvador Dali's film, he spoke about in Un Chien Andalou that there isn't symbolism, it's just a bunch of really strange scenes and unusual imagery. Okay, so let's talk about video a little bit. So as with film cameras, video cameras capture and record a series of still images that are constructed into a moving picture. But with video, sights and sounds are digitized. That is, they're transformed into electronic messages. The information is stored as on a videotape or memory cards, or transmitted through the air like broadcast or via cable. The digitized information is projected on a surface or displayed on a monitor that transforms it into visual images consisting of lines of light and dark and color. The more lines there are, the higher the resolution or the sharpness of the picture will be. And as with film, a series of still images in rapid succession create the illusion of movement and the passage of time. So there are artists who have embraced video as an art form. I'm going to show you a clip of Bill Biola's The Crossing because it's two images side by side. Sometimes it was side by side, sometimes it was kind of front to back, and one has to do with water and one has to do with fire. And of course, then there's also a component of sound in there as well. So the textbook discusses that the crossing is really he's doing some kind of spiritual symbolism with the two sides with the fire and the water. And in this person's work, Jillian Waring, she actually has a video that kind of incorporates three different kinds of video. She has interview with someone from a documentary, and then so it's kind of like three different videos happening, and the work invites reflection on the definition of reality and the limitations of the documentary genre. So she's interviewing someone who was in a documentary, and it also penetrates the relationship between the private and public realms of immediate family dynamics with spectatorship. Just the idea of, like watching people, and this idea of documentary film, how true to reality it is. Okay, let's talk really briefly about some digital arts. So broadly speaking, digital art is the production of images with the assistance of a computer. Computer graphics software programs offer palettes of millions of colors and effects of light and shade, and simulated textures and surfaces can be produced really quickly. Images can be viewed from any vantage point and saved at any stage of development. So the image on the left, the blue door, this is a photograph that the artist has gone back and then digitally manipulated. And same with Lynn Hirschman's Digital Venus. So while the blue door is an original photograph by the artist that has been manipulated, Lynn Hirschman is using a photograph of a pre-existing painting and then doing some digital editing to it. So you can the body of the woman is the part that's been digitally altered. And then there are images that are completely produced electronically, digitally, I guess. Jorge Colombos does images just using like an iPad and doing little sketches, but they're entirely produced digitally and not based on photographs that he's taken. And lastly, just talking about web design. This kind of crosses over with our graphic design that we've spoken about. Part of what keeps users on a website is the visual feedback we obtain when we click onto it. Web design has two tasks. One is technical and involves programming, like how users click their way around a web page, how links to other pages and sites are established, and how to insert still images or animated clips and sound. And the other is aesthetic, accompanying art and design. Surely you have probably at some point in your life gone to a website that was not well designed, and it was maybe clunky, hard to navigate, maybe just aesthetically not pleasing. So this is something that as graphic designers, if that's a field that you go into, you absolutely have to get into web design and being able to not only make a website that is easy to get around, it's user friendly, but also it's aesthetically pleasing. And so the book uses an example of the Metropolitan Museum of Art's website and how it incorporates images of the museum within that, as well as pictures from the Alvin Ailey Dance Theater website. The idea that you are creating, making color choices, making space choices. Do you want to incorporate images that are moving, things like that. So this idea of film and photography and movement and time all coming together with the idea of graphic design. It's really a lot of things that have to be considered with that medium. Okay, and that is going to conclude our lecture on imaging.